Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today. David here from Monroe Motorsports. We're working on the 66 Falcon. Those of you who have been following the series are well aware. And taking a pause today, and yes, it's just going to be me talking. I'm not going to show you anything much. But we've reached a point now where this car is actually kind of finished in phase one. So phase one was basically to get this car back on the road and make it reliable and a car that we can just get in, start it, go, and not worry about getting home again. And I think we've achieved that at this point. So that's a great place to be. But what I wanted to go over today was the costs involved in getting there. And if you're doing this as a hobby, or you're interested in doing this as a hobby for yourself, this is going to be a classic car chat version of my videos. We're going to talk about what it costs to get to this point. Now, realize that the labor is all free because this is a hobby, and the labor is not something that you can bill, in my opinion. This is what you do for fun. It's no different than buying a ticket to a movie or going to a ball game or anything like that where you would spend money to be entertained. You're going to be entertained and also learn things as you do this. So it's also a way of getting an education. So all the labor is not monetarily figured into these numbers that I'm going to go over. This is all just the parts that went into the car. Now, the car also came with a few things when I got it. It had 4 new tires on it, not what I would have bought, but 4 new tires on it. New gas tank, new aluminum radiator, and new timing chain and gears in the engine. That's pretty much all. The condition of the rest of the car, if you haven't watched that initial video where I go over the whole car, I bought this as a solid shell, basically, to start with, that I wasn't going to have to do any real paint and body work to. And so it has a good solid body. Paint's not looking great, but we'll cover that later. And the interior was completely trashed. What I didn't know about the car when I bought it was just how bad it was mechanically. It came to me on a trailer, it got unloaded, drove into the garage barely under its own power, and then I started working on it and taking care of all of its many myriad of problems that it had. I don't regret buying the car, despite all the problems that it had when I got it, because I didn't care really about the mechanicals. I intended to replace most of those with upgraded parts and eventually do the V8 swap. So a lot of this was, going to go away anyway. The possible blunder that I made was thinking that I could easily get this thing on the road and just enjoy it as is, as the 6-cylinder car, for a while before I went ahead and did all the V8 swap stuff. I've gotten to that point, again, phase one, but it took a lot more expense and time than I thought. So, as these projects always inevitably do. So, let's go over the numbers. We already talked about the things that were already done in this car. The previous owner also had replaced the master cylinder and the front wheel cylinders in 2018. It's now 2023 when I'm filming this. I ended up replacing those because they were bad already. Probably a result of the really rusty brake lines this car had. Anyway, so I divide this into categories. I have engine, transmission, chassis, which is all brakes and suspension, and then body, which is body and interior components. So engine, things like belts and hoses and the cracked exhaust manifold and the carburetor that wouldn't come back from being near dead, spark plugs, carb kits, the starter, that kind of stuff. In total, I've spent about $600 to $700, maybe $800 on those parts. Unfortunately, I didn't keep the best records of some of this stuff. So I'm going to say it's probably $700 to $800. Not terrible. Next we go to the transmission, which worked, but if you've been watching this series, you know it was leaking badly and getting worse all the time. So I wound up rebuilding that myself. Again, free labor, educational experience for me. I'd never done one before, and it turned out okay after a couple of missteps. So if you had to farm that out, it'd be a couple $1,000 easy. For me, the parts total cost was $221. That's pretty cheap. So I got a new transmission in there for $221. So now we're at like 1,000, right? The chassis, all the bushings in the suspension, the metal fuel and brake lines, the 1966 only tie rod ends that weren't exactly cheap, and the wonderful control arm fiasco, and I only counted the ones that are actually on the car. The other ones I was able to send back and get a refund on, even though they were all the same part. Total for the chassis refurbishment and no tires, $804. So a pretty big chunk there. Because there's a lot to do here, and we're still not done. Still trying to decide what I'm doing with the leaf springs. The rear shocks are still what was on the car when I got it. And the rear differential is obviously going to get replaced when we do the V8 swap. So there's still some things to do back there. The leaf springs, probably $250, $300 if you don't buy fancy ones. And shocks, if I spend the money on fancy Bolsteins or the Vikings that'll match the front, probably $100 to $200. All right, then we move on to the body category, and I just put everything together because the exterior I didn't really have to do that much to. All of the weather stripping needed replaced, so we bought all of that. And then obviously the carpeting and the interior seats, and bought a wiper switch because this one was broken, new old stock on eBay, bought that, and a heater core, among other things. So all that together was a whopping $2,400 rounded. The seats were $1,100, so that's the big chunk of it. I mean, that's almost half of the expense. The carpeting was about $330, $340, and then the rest was, rubber weather strips. But I will say that the weather stripping was probably one of the best investments of doing this, body stuff, because it really made the car quiet. The doors shut properly now. Don't be afraid to spend money on that first, because it worked out being a very good thing. So in total, with some thrown in for fluids and things like that, I've invested in tangible items in this car roughly $4,100 to $4,200. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Didn't take long to spend that. About a year and a half. So the car cost me, when I bought it in its dilapidated state, about $4,300 if I remember right. So I'm into this car for $8,500. Am I happy being in that position? And we're only in phase one, mind you. I think it's a reasonable number based on what I know and my experience with doing these cars. I think the money that's in it now, I'm not sure I could completely get it out, but I probably could. Being that the car's got such a nice interior now, and it runs and drives very nicely. Other than the cosmetic appearance of it, it's really not in bad shape. So, yes, I think the money invested, not a good word to use, is probably reasonable. Because if I was going to go out and buy a car in this exact condition, I'd probably have to spend that amount, maybe a little less, but possibly even a little more. If this were a Mustang in the same condition that this one is in now, I'd probably have to spend $10,000 to $12,000 even for a six-cylinder. So we're not in a bad place. Now, I also didn't include in those numbers the cost of getting the alignment done, because that's a service item, and the machine shop work to get the broken studs out of the cylinder head. I didn't add those in either. But those are the only sublet items I've done that I've had to take and have done by somebody else. Everything else has been done right here in this garage with my own set of tools. So that's it for that. And that's something that, again, if you're going to get into this hobby, you're going to want to start thinking about the investment in dollars that it's going to take to get you to where you want to go. If you're going to have to pay people to do any of this kind of thing, the cost is going to skyrocket. So you may, if you're the kind of person that can't do a lot of this stuff yourself, you ought to consider buying a nicer car already done. It really does make more sense. You can't restore cars for the cost of a restoration. The only time that pays is when you're dealing with, Duesenbergs and really rare Boss Mustangs and that kind of thing, where the value of the car when it's finished is just so astronomically high that you can recoup the restoration cost. But not on these cheap little cars like this. But that's not the purpose of this project. The purpose is to have fun, to be able to wrench on the car and get our mechanical desires met by tinkering and playing around with this thing. And it's been a great car. I just this past week broke the first bolt, not counting the exhaust studs, but broke off the first bolt for something on this car since working on it. In fact, I had to cut it off. It was for the exhaust hanger in the back. Every other nut and bolts come off this car with little drama. It's been remarkable. Certainly a large contrast to the cheap Italian cars I used to work on back in my youth. So, thought you'd find that interesting, just knowing how much money we've had to spend on this poor thing up to this point. So phase one's complete. I'm essentially calling this car done for this year right now until next fall. This is now currently the end of February. So we're going to just enjoy this and drive it and do a couple things to it over the summer. I'm going to address the paint probably very soon. And that's kind of it. It's running very well. I just replaced a fuel filter that I think may have been getting clogged that was in there from the old fuel lines. But it's actually running decent now. So just get in it, you hit the key, it fires right up and off you go. So that's good news. Probably could drive it anywhere. I'm a little suspicious of the rear axle. I think there might be a pinion bearing making noise back there, so we'll stay close to home to some degree with it. But you can drive it daily. It's not going to be a problem. The steering box that's been a problem or a thorn in my side since I got this car, with use seems to have fixed itself. The car steers very nice now. No more heavy feeling or the occasional, not really a notchiness because that would terrify me, but resistance you could feel every once in a while. And now it's smooth as butter. So that seems to have corrected itself. I'm excited to keep going with this thing. So we're going to enjoy it this season, the summer. And then come fall, we should be ready to begin the transformation into the V8 car. I'm kind of browsing right now for tires and wheels, trying to figure out what size I want to get. So I have the rear axle. I have the engine and transmission now. And I got to get, probably replace the leaf springs. I'm thinking those are pretty crusty. I think we'll get rid of those. And new shocks for the back, we need to do that. But then we're going to be ready for the conversion and turn it into a little bit of a hot rod, something I've never had. So that'll be fun. So that's going to probably start next fall and then go through the winter, and that shouldn't take, he says, terribly long if everything goes as planned. I've got the motor mounts that I need. I've got throttle linkage that I need. I don't think there's going to be too much else that I'm going to have to source, fortunately. Question mark on the drive shaft. Don't know how that's going to play out yet. If that's going to be the same as the one that's in there now or not. But that's really all I've got to do. So, phase one complete. Phase two to come. If you have any questions on any of this, please let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And don't forget to join us on Facebook if you're a Facebook person on Forgotten Falcons. and you can see regular updates on this car and lots of others on that site. As always, I thank you for watching, commenting, and subscribing. I look forward to talking to you soon. Enjoy the summer.